At the same time, this report is motivating and offers hope. It shows that when programs receive sustained, high-quality professional development, like the Supporting All Learners to Thrive training pilot, the quality of classroom interactions, inclusion, and family engagement improves dramatically. These findings reaffirm something we've always believed. When we invest in our early learning educators, children thrive. That is why Octal is committed to acting on the lessons in this report. We are strengthening the systems that prevent exclusion and expanding the supports that keep children connected to care and learning. This includes sharing ongoing information about the Infant Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Network, improving our data systems, supporting the early learning workforce through coaching, professional learning, communication, and collaboration. People always ask when. I'm like, change takes time, but I promise you, it is absolutely coming. We also encourage better use of developmental screening tools, like our ages and stages. And for our quality rating system, Keystone Stars, we are considering the addition of bonus points or scoring for positive behavior supports, training, and practices in addition to behavior tracking. Of course, we cannot talk about strengthening the system without strong advocacy for additional funds. I have to say this again. Of course, we cannot talk about strengthening the system without strong advocacy for additional funds to the early intervention system. So I'm calling on every partner in this room to take action. Together, we can ensure that Pennsylvania becomes a state where no child is removed from early learning without support, no family faces challenges alone, and every educator has the tools to help children succeed. As the report emphasized, this is about dismantling barriers and building bridges between families and providers, between policy and practice, and between early learning and lifelong opportunities. So as we begin today's conversation, let's remember that this isn't just a report, it's a roadmap. It's an invitation to work together, to listen, and to lead with equity, because when we support young children and their families, we're not only preparing them for school, but we're preparing them for life success. Thank you for being here and for your continued partnership and ensuring that every young learner in Pennsylvania has the chance to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Shantae, for setting the stage. Now we're going to hear from Jennifer Starakos from the William Penn Foundation. She's the Program Director of Children and Families.
Oops. I'm gonna try. I can do a laptop and a microphone at the same time, but we'll try. I'm too old to be wanting to read remarks off a laptop, but a printer did not work this morning, so this is where we are. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jen Stavrakis. I'm the Director of the Children and Families Program at William Penn Foundation. On behalf of the foundation, it's my pleasure to greet all of you, and I'm so glad that we're able to come together this morning to learn and to reaffirm our commitment to inclusive early childhood education. As most of you know, the foundation has a long history of investment in early childhood education, particularly focused on increased access to high quality programming and supporting advocacy, those important advocacy investments to ensure that more state resources are directed towards the early childhood system. We've also invested in ensuring that ECE providers have the skills and resources to best serve our young learners, but we know that vast gaps remain. I don't have the personal connection to this issue that my colleague Kelly Brown does. I know that many of you have heard her personal story with her son and struggling to keep him enrolled in daycare. She would tell you he's in college now and he's doing very well, but she has a real personal connection to these issues. The closest I came is when my then 3-year-old daughter seemed like she was very determined to pursue a career in being a pathological liar. And while at times it was really shocking for the childcare staff and for us, it wasn't a disruptive behavior. And we know that when a child is classified as being disruptive, that is what can doom a child and a family from receiving the education supports that they need. Early childhood education lays the foundation for a lifetime of learning. It is such an important part in a child's life, and it's also so important for families. My kids are much smarter. They're also party trained because of early childhood education. And also it gave me the ability to work, which was so important to our family's survival. Cannot underestimate the importance of high quality early childhood education. But if a child can't access that, the ripple effects are economic, their mental health, their educational. By embedding inclusion at the very start, we ensure that children learn from day one that everyone belongs. And in doing so, we nurture empathy, respect, understanding, qualities that are needed more than ever right now in our communities. I hope you'll join me in thanking the staff and at Children First and their partners. I know you mentioned PennACE and Trying Together. All three of them are really fierce advocates for young children of Pennsylvania. And without the coordination that they have developed, we would not be able to make a statewide case for the importance of these efforts. And we know in Philadelphia, unfortunately, if only Philadelphia wants something, too bad for us, that's a Philadelphia problem. And so the relationships that Children First has built over the years with other advocacy groups across the state has been essential to being able to move these issues forward. So thank you so much for continuing to do this work and continuing to listen, because lots of people have lots of things to say, but they're not listening to the people on the ground who are doing the work. And I'm really excited to hear the recommendations and think about how our foundation and others can help be part of the solution.
Thank you, Jennifer, for those remarks and supporting the work. Keep talking while we're going.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I appreciate it. So as we ground ourselves in today's conversation, it's important to remember the why this work matters. Across the country and right here in Pennsylvania, we continue to see that suspension and expulsion disproportionately impacts Black and Brown children, and even in preschool. These disparities are not for the results of children being worse behaved. They're a result of implicit bias, inconsistent support system, and the lack of access to resources to help these teachers manage challenging behaviors in a developmentally appropriate ways. When a child is removed from an early learning environment, they're not just missing a few days of care, they're missing out on the foundational experiences that build language, emotional regulation, and social skills, the very tools they need for lifelong success. Each suspension represents a disruption, a child's sense of belonging, safety, and it sends a message, often unintentionally, that they don't fit. But the impact doesn't stop with the child. Families feel this deeply. Parents lose trust in programs, they feel judged, isolated, and unsure where to turn for help. For working families, especially those already facing barriers, the loss of care can affect employment, income stability, and even housing security. And for communities, these exclusions erode the very trust that's necessary to build strong collaborative relationships between families and educators. The good news is that this is preventable. We can stop this cycle and through the strong policy, ongoing training, and sustained investments. When educators have access to mental health consultants, coaching, and family engagement supports, they're better able to respond to behaviors and empathy rather than exclusions. When families have clear pathways to resources, they're empowered to partner with programs rather than fear them. So this work is not about blame. It's about building systems that's responsive, compassionate, and equitable. A system where every child, regardless of race, ability, or circumstance, is seen as capable and deserving of support. That's why we're here today, to move from awareness to action together. Didn't work for me. You have the magic touch. Let's see.
Some kind of touch.
So now we'd like to take a closer look at the findings from Supporting All Learners to Thrive report. Thank you. The data was gathered to show a clear and urgent need for action. Across Pennsylvania, young children continue to experience suspension and expulsion in early learning programs, practices that we know contribute to the preschool to prison pipeline. The evidence is particularly stark when we look at children of color and children with special needs who are disproportionately impacted. Our findings highlight that this is not just a localized issue. From Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, from counties in between, the challenges are consistent. Through the impact, we may look very differently depending on the region. By ensuring that Western Pennsylvania voices were included in this report, we wanted to capture the statewide scope of the problem and also the shared opportunities for solution. As we move forward in today's discussion, I want to center us around the goals of this convening. So first, we wanted to understand how suspension and expulsion occurred across early childhood settings. That means going beyond and looking beyond the numbers, the conditions, the stressors, the systematic barriers that contribute to these decisions. Secondly, we wanted to identify what supports educators and families truly need to prevent suspension and expulsion. For educators, that might mean mental health consultants, trauma-informed training, or consistent coaching. And for families, it can also mean communication, resources, and the sense of partnership, knowing that when challenges arise, they're not alone. And finally, the goal is to develop policy recommendations that promote equity, belonging, and children that are thriving. Because this work isn't just about preventing exclusions, it's about building systems. And then again, just to highlight all the collaborators on this report, as I highlighted earlier, us, Panacea, and Trying Together, and PHMC, in order for us to really dig deeper in the work and to hear from the voices across the field. So our approach for this project, we use a mixed method design. So from providers and parent surveys across the state, and we conducted several focus groups. PHMC helped lead the work in our classroom assessments that we did in several classrooms in Philadelphia and professional development training. And we wanted to make sure the work was grounded in trauma-informed, equity-centered, and family-based partnerships. Just want to show you by the numbers. So as you can see, how many providers and parents that participated and took in our surveys. In our focus groups, we were able to speak with 100 providers across the state and 65 parents and caregivers across the state. And as we'll dig in a little bit deeper, we conducted classroom assessments, pre and post assessments. We conducted 22, but as you know, the nature of the work, and it's a 3-year project, one program actually closed. So we did pre and post assessments on 21. And then 9 of those 21 classrooms that we identified, we did professional development because we wanted to see it was their effect if we had professional development on those classrooms. And then also you can see just some demographics. Most of the providers and parents that came from urban areas throughout Pennsylvania. A good majority are from high quality centers. And almost 50% of the parents did not know what the STAR level their child was going to. So it's interesting. Most of the programs and the providers that took part in this research, it was mostly from center-based. And as you can see, from funding source, we reached the gamut of everything that's represented. Of course, private pay as well, but subsidy, PHL pre-K, pre-K counts, Head Start as well. So now we're gonna pass it over to Inella to really share the human impact.
Technical difficulties, so I'm just gonna, that's really quick.
Thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Stephanie Blake, And while we work through some technical difficulties to make sure our online participants have access to this very deck, I'm going to be talking about the human impact. And so we've mentioned already that we started off with listening, both to providers as well as to parents. And while we collected data that you already see, we also heard the direct stories from families, some of whom are in this room, and providers. And what's clear is that they all want the best for kids, but they really feel lost in that process because the system at writ large is not really being supportive of all of our children and their need to thrive.
There you go. Sorry, one more thing, and then switch it.
All right, I think we're almost back in
Almost, I just
business.
need my mouse back over here. There we go. All right, you should be able to switch now. Just have
All
to-
right, and so online participants, are you seeing everything now? Yes.
Yes.
All right,
Thank
excellent.
you.
And thank you all for your patience here. And so this represents some of the direct quotes we heard from both providers as well as families. So the first three represent things that we heard directly from providers. And as you can see, providers are really left feeling isolated in this process, that they may want the best for children, but if they're navigating in a system that's not being supportive of all children, from the early learning center to mental health supports, to even doctors making the proper referrals, then what happens in the classroom is they really are left feeling isolated. And then that further isolation is then passed on to parents. And so parents have noted that in some cases, they didn't even realize their child was actually suspended or expelled because they were told things like, this program is no longer a good fit for your child. And so you can imagine how devastated it can be for a parent to receive either that kind of phone call or in-person conversation that this program can no longer support your child in care and them not having anywhere to go as a recourse. And so we did both surveys and we also did focus groups because we know how important it is to have direct conversation with people to get really underneath some surface level topics. And so we heard directly from providers and it offered a different view than what we heard from the surveys. And so what was clear is that staffing is a prominent issue. And we've already talked about how overburdened the early childhood education staff is, from staff burnout to actually just not having enough physical people in the space to support all the children. So much so that directors are having to step in and teach classrooms. We also heard directly from providers that there are immense delays in EI evaluation and services. So when a kid doesn't get the proper services they need at that critical development window, what that means is then that child is not supported in their development, but in some cases, a child care can also not necessarily support them anymore, and then push out begins. There's also limited agency collaboration. So there's different folks throughout both the Philadelphia region as well as the state who are doing great work, but that work is really not happening in a coordinated, collaborative way. And what happens when that doesn't happen is that folks feel isolated and not being equipped with the best information to support all kids. And then we all know the big C word, COVID-19. A lot of the children that were recently in care in early childhood education are the direct children who were born in COVID. And as a result, the things that have been showing up in classrooms have been far more aggressive in terms of dysregulation, in terms of the lack of social and emotional development that children typically get when they're not at home with their parents all day. Some inconsistencies that we want to highlight with the survey data is that, parents mentioned that, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, that they receive communication from providers, but the value of that communication and also the quality of it really varied. And we got more into the depth of this during the focus groups. But we heard directly from providers that, they are communicating with families to a degree, but they did admit that they could perhaps be doing it better. The other piece that we want to lift up is inadequate training. So there is professional development that exists, but the professional development that is currently required is not adequate to what is actually needed to address the children that are in front of them. The third is inconsistencies in guidance from regulating agencies. while we do have standards across things like STARS and ACTEL, how it's actually put into practice can really vary from childcare provider to childcare provider. So some could be working on, inclusive practices, where others are, looking to push out kids as a first step because they don't have the staff to actually keep a child. So this is what we heard from parents. So the first is a lack of documentation. So we've been calling this the invisible but visible problem. And that's because the pain is absolutely visible, but the ways in which it actually shows up is not documented in a formal way. And so because of this, families will receive phone calls such as, such and such is having a tough day today, and we need you to come pick them up early. And then sometimes families are given a surprise on a Friday afternoon that, we can no longer, keep your child in care. So you can imagine how devastating and dysregulating those kind of phone calls are. And they're having different impacts that we'll talk about shortly. Also, families noted the delays in evaluation and services. And so when I mention delays, I want to be very specific. The delays that we're talking about are not just simply, we're waiting an additional week. These parents are waiting months and sometimes years. In some cases, children are actually aging out, which we think is criminal. And so when we also think about healthcare access and stigma, so we don't want to move away from the fact that there is stigma regarding trying to get services for your child. And that stigma is wrapped up in a lot of systems distrust. And when we think about things like what happens to kids who usually are labeled with diagnoses, sometimes that is further reason for schools to criminalize them. So parents have angst around this very thing. And so what's really important that we're realizing throughout this process is that providers need to be equipped to have compassionate conversations with families so they understand the value of early intervention, but also to make sure that the stigma doesn't become the reason why a child doesn't get support. Lack of knowledge of rights. So families really don't know what's available to them at the start of their entry into early learning, but also when they're actually experiencing this very thing. Like I said, a lot of them actually didn't know this was quote unquote expulsion and suspension. They thought this only happened in K-12. So when we actually provided them the definition of what suspension and expulsion was, you could see their heads exploding when we were telling them this. And so the other piece is that this also has an economic occupational burden. Early learning, we know, has not only benefits for the child, but the entire family. So when families can't rely on a child care provider to be entrusted with care for 8 hours a day and get random phone calls, especially if you're a wage worker, that really undercuts your ability to keep a job. The other piece is staffing, and so parents are also seeing the pervasive issue of staffing. They're seeing new teachers in their child's classroom. They're seeing when a new teacher shows up, that means that their child has to get to know somebody all over again, and how the lack of continuity really has both impacts to the overall system of things, but also the child. And also cultural misunderstandings and biases. So when we think about how behaviors can be described, for example, if a child is doing something developmentally appropriate, like using a pencil and poking their friend at it, that can be described as that, or it can be described as such and such is actually stabbing their classmate. So we have to be very, very careful of how we're using language when we're talking about 0 to 5-year-olds. The other piece that I really think is important to lift up is that parents didn't just share their stories with us, they also share valuable suggestions of things that we ought to be doing to meet the moment. And so increase high quality training for providers. They recognize that providers may not necessarily have the training that they need to actually meet the moment. And that is the responsibility of the necessary funding sources to make sure that need is met. Also improve compensation and retention efforts for providers. We all can agree in this room that early learning is so important and our providers ought to be paid way more than they are. And for those of you who don't know what providers are generally paid, in some cases, fast food restaurants and retail stores can get paid more than providers. So what that shows is that we need to be paying our folks more if we want them to be doing a really good job and also to stay in the respective profession. Increase inclusive therapeutic support options. parents noted that these particular options were like the only recourse for their child after attending, let's say, 6 programs. So they put very value on this very thing and said that there needs to be more increased options available for all families who may need it. And parents also noted that I not only want this to happen to my child, but I don't want it to happen to any other kid. And so there is space for parents to want to actually work on system improvement efforts like this very one. And we ought to create the conditions for them to do so. And now I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Stephanie Blake.
Thank you, Inela. Just to give you some more context around our training and assessments, and make sure you go to the report so you can read all more of it in detail. Our training was grounded in the inclusive classroom profile and the early childhood technical assistance environment indicators. It's always a mouthful. So ECTA for short and ICP. So we focus on emotional support, individual instruction, and inclusion. So just to give you a high level overview of the classroom assessments, providers felt stronger confidence, and they saw a stronger child engagement and measurable growth and inclusion practices. We have the data in our report, so you can see what the gains were when folks participated in the professional development training versus those that did not. And just give you a frame of the timeline. So again, 22 programs that we want to do classroom assessments, one close in the mix of that. We use the ICP. For those of you who are not familiar, they look more so on the classroom level inclusion supports. So a child in the classroom had to have an IEP, and they were observed to see how their strategies were to support the child with the IEP and inclusive strategies. And then the ECTA look more so on a program level. So what is the program on a whole doing? And just so you can see our timeline, our pre-assessments happened in fall of 2023 to spring of 2024. And we just finished the post-assessments this year. And then just so you can see on the bottom, one site closed. And now I'm going to pass it back to Inela to share with us our policy recommendations.
Thank you. All right, so the moment you all been waiting for. And so we split our policy recommendations into both short-term and long-term. And we see this not because we're not urgently trying to move things fast enough, but we really are thinking about this range in terms of political will. And so when we think about the things that are already working in the early learning ecosystem, things like rapid response and the ECE Family Navigator program, that is something that both providers and families saw great value in, but we needed to be scaled. And so having this kind of improvement could really help impact the system. The other piece is provide add-on payments for children with IEPs or IFSPs. So what this means, in the K-12 space, a child who has a diagnosed IEP or IFSP gets actually more money associated with them versus a kid that does not. And so there are other states in the country that mirrors the same thing in the early learning space, but Pennsylvania is not one of them, and we think that needs to change. Incentives for professional development focus on trauma-informed care as well as family engagement. So I want to put emphasis on family engagement because I think it's something that's so important that often doesn't get talked about in higher education spaces, as well as in training. And we think this is something that people shouldn't just be doing in a way that isn't through best practices. Require parent intake meetings to review policies and rights. So we think it's really important for parents to know at the front and center of things of what their rights are so they can make sure that they're utilizing their agency from the very start. The other piece that we want to lift up is increased funding for teacher recruitment and retention. As many of you know, that we currently still don't have a state budget. And one of the things that the governor proposed back in the spring was to have a line item for this. And we're still fighting for that, but we think it's critically important to keep building on that momentum. Create state guidance on preventing suspensions in early learning. We think it's really important that in order to actually tackle this problem and build the case for needed funding and supports, that we actually have to make sure that we're actually doing tracking around this too. And so also funding pilot programs to demonstrate best practices and inclusion. We found that pilots can be a very effective way to test something and then see about scaling things. And then these are the long-term things. So as we share, we think it's really, really important that we need to be tracking this very thing. And we think it needs to be a track across these different funding streams. So childcare works, Head Start, and pre-K counts. We also think it's really important to require people who are in front of kids to make sure they're trauma informed and also trained in equity focused best practices for all ECE staff. Integrate these competencies into higher education and CDA pathways. As I mentioned before, some of these things are not being talked about until after a child, more so professionals in front of a child. And we think it's really important that this is happening way earlier in the process. And then we also think it's really important to establish a centralized entity to coordinate EI and mental health services. And in some cases, like a city like Philadelphia, we also think can do justice by having one of these as well to coordinate services. Ensure workforce for investments for pay parity with K-12. As we said, we value our early learning educators. I mean, that they should be paid the same that K-12 educators are paid. And then build statewide consistency through cross-agency collaboration. So this is a lot, and we expect many of you to be a part of really moving these along so that we can really do considerable work on this in the next few years so that we're not still having the same conversations in another 5. All right, so it's now time to hear from folks who have direct impact with this very work. And so we're going to bring up our facilitator, Valerie K. Olds. We're so happy to have you, and we're going to pass it off.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here. So thank you, Anela and Stephanie, for walking us through the data. Numbers give us one perspective, but it is the lived experience of families and providers that truly show us what is really at stake. That's why this next part of the program is so very important. So I'd like to welcome up here our panelists, Elisa Wilson and Benita Tillman, who will share from the parent perspective. Zakia Boone, CEO of WonderSpring, and Monica Valente, the program director of the Therapeutic Nursery at Children's Crisis Treatment Center, who will share from the provider perspective.
I'm gonna turn this towards them. Yeah.
All right. So we will be moving through a few guiding questions. And to make sure that we hear from each of you and also stay on time, I'll direct each question to specific panelists. I ask that you keep your responses brief, about 1 to 2 minutes, so we can hear from everyone. How's everybody listening?
You're the expert.
All right. So our first question is for the parent perspectives, Melissa and Benita. Can each of you share a brief story about your family's experience with suspension or expulsion and one support that would have made a difference at that time?
Morning.
Is it on?
Is it off?
I don't think so.
Yes, thank you. I had the privilege of taking care of my 2 nephews for about 6 months, and the youngest one, he was 5, and he was going to daycare, and he, about a week into me having them, his nephew was 7, we didn't even have, the daycare said he would not be allowed to come back. And, well, I still have to go to work and do all the things I have to do. And what they said was, and this was prior to myself, that he was running around, he wouldn't sit still, he wasn't doing what they felt. Now, this is a daycare that was a family-oriented daycare. And so what I saw was that they weren't fully equipped to really understand what was happening to him, because one, he was just transferred to me to take care of him. And so, but all of these things that were happening before, I had nothing to do with. So he wasn't able to go to the daycare. I had to scramble to find another daycare, not share what happened at the last daycare. And so in this new one that he went, they were very supportive. I did share that he's in a new setting, and the staff there were really supportive by having him have time to speak with. They actually had like a, I'm not gonna say not a chaplain, but someone who was able to like talk with us. And so they were able to have him take breaks at time, and I let them know that because he's in my care, you know, the things that has been happening, I'm not able to really, I'm learning how to support him. And so with that, he maintained being in there until he was transferred back to his mom. But that was really very hard because all my kids are grown. And so daycare setting is very different. And so to try to find daycare for a child who they label, because I say they labeled him as so disruptive, but in a new setting, he was thriving. They just took the time to support him. And so I felt like had the first daycare given the time to support him, he would have been fine there also. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Hello, okay. So at 2 years old, my son was expelled from daycare. Like, I know it was a long time ago, but sometimes I'm trying not to cry because I'm emotional, but because some of them old feelings starting to come back because I felt alone and isolated. I didn't know what to do. So at the time I was taking care of my grandfather, so I had a senior citizen and a baby. So because my son was expelled, I couldn't get nobody else in my family to watch him. They were saying that he was like quote unquote bad. I had to drop out of school. I lost my job because I couldn't go to work, and I had to take care of my grandfather and my son. It was hard. I think if I had somebody to walk along with me to help me understand what was going on in that situation with me and my family, somebody to walk along with me and guide me through the situation and gave me some directions. They just expelled my child and that was it. That was it. So I was on my own trying to find out what was next steps. And lucky for me, I had a good pediatrician for my son, and he did everything in his power to help me with my son. He seen things in my son that I didn't, and that led me to a journey of getting evaluated. And he was sent to organization called Children Crisis Treatment Center. So it still hurts just thinking about it. And the sad part about it is that all these years later, my son be 20 in January, it's still going on. Right before this, I was on the phone advocating for another family. It's still going on. My son is 18 years later and it's still going on. It's unacceptable. So some changes have been made, but more work needs to be done.
Thank you for that, Anita. All right, so we're gonna go now to our second question, which is for the providers. So Zakia and Monica, from your experience as providers, what strategies have been most effective in supporting young learners who present challenges in classrooms?
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. I'm gonna try, to do my best. I have so many things to say. But I think key points to remember. What we do in a classroom is such a small component of, of the bigger picture. And so definitely meeting the family where they are, figuring out what the needs are of the caregiver, family, and the child. We have to align, there has to be an alignment. We have to meet in the middle and come up with agreed upon goals. Sometimes our own agendas conflict with the family's agenda, and things like having, multiple responsibilities and caring for a child plus caring for your, elderly family member poses more barriers. So we have to, as an agency, we have to really understand what those barriers are. And we don't know, and we have to formulate questions and discussions around, like, how are you feeling today? How was it getting into the agency, and, where do we go from here? So setting the tone from the very beginning that we know something is going on. We know something, and let's have a conversation at a pace that is comfortable for the caregiver to share. We know that a lot of things do not come up in the first session or the first meeting or the first introduction, but making sure that the families feel safe and secure enough to share whenever they feel comfortable. Partnerships goes a long way. I know that, we hear the word collaboration, engagement, but what does that really mean, right? Part of it is setting our own biases and cultural biases aside, and our own needs as a professional, and really, really, really understanding where the family, what the needs are, and, what steps we need to take together to get them to achieve those goals. In CCTC, we do it in a trauma-informed, genuine, and caring manner. We are transparent with our families. We talk about the roadblocks and what the future entails.
Thank you.
Good morning. At Wonder Spring, we engage according to our values. So, our first value is safety first. We have to make sure children are safe, not just the child with the presenting behaviors, but all the other potentially 19 other kids in the classroom. So safety first, and when we talk to parents, we present with a safety first priority. Then quality, right? So what does quality care tell us we should do in this case? What quality standard should we follow in order to ensure that we can best meet the needs of this child? What quality practices? And caring is our third value. We aren't the enemy, and we make sure to let the families feel that in our interactions. Kindness goes a very long way in just letting families know your kid's not a bad kid, but we do have to address these behaviors. And so we do that with care and concern and empathy. And then, of course, fun. So at Wonder Spring, fun is a core value. And one of the things that we make sure to do is, so for example, at our center at New Market West at 59th and Market, when you first walk in, there's a huge, huge lobby that's fun. There's all sorts of fun things for kids to do. Why not have this meeting there so the kid can be engaged while the adults are talking? Like, just things like that help to even make the meeting go a little more smoothly. And then, of course, call me, I'm always good for jokes. But by approaching with that methodology, leading with our values, helps us to that we do not have a magic wand. There have been some very challenging situations that we've had to escalate, pull in additional partners. We need School District of Philadelphia support. We need city support. We need whoever will pull in those resources. But by leading with our values and being consistent with that, we kind of have a roadmap for our directors to follow and then engage with families for success.
Thank you. We're going to take a brief pause to deal with some technical issues.
Ask you all to scoot like 2 feet forward so that that's not in your eyes. And so that it shows up in the video and the photos and everything too.
It's good if the panelists.
And also that if you're not blinded, right? Is that better?
Is
that better on your?
The lights out.
Is that more comfortable on your eyes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now walk
Great.
around.
And then I'm gonna need to just adjust this so
Good
that those online can see you. There, I know. There you go. Okay, thank you.
Y'all could ask for some sunglasses.
Oh,
Sorry.
one more inch, one more inch.
But should I?
Maybe adjust this again. Just trying to get you all on there. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, let's come around here. All right, so the next question is for all of you. In a quick round robin, what's one way parents and providers can partner to ensure children feel included and supported in the classroom?
Since I have Mike, one way I feel is that, would have been good is.
Can everyone hear?
Oh,
Can you put your mic a little
Yes.
close? Thanks, Melissa.
thank you. One way I believe that how that would have worked if they would have had conversations. We could have had conversations together and then we would have been able to understand what was happening, but definitely the conversations on both sides.
Assume positive intent. Assume that the parent wants to do the right thing, and I have this conversation with teachers. Don't assume that parent doesn't care. Don't assume that they're not answering the phone. They don't want to lose their job. That's why they're not answering the phone the 5th time you called. And same for the families. Assume that the teacher wants to do the right thing and cares about your child. Don't assume that the staff at the childcare center is the enemy and just wants to kick your child out. So starting with assuming positive intent and then build upon that relationship between first teacher and parent and then school administrators and parents or center administrators and parents. I think assuming positive intent, giving the benefit of the doubt goes a long way to just keep positive energy in the room instead of attacking.
So I like this question. I used to say this to on both roles, to my children, my son's teacher, and then when I was a teacher, I used to say it to my parents. So this is our child. See, when he's with me, I feed him, I dress him, make sure he's safe. When he's with you, you give him breakfast, lunch, and snack, depending on the time of day, you might be giving dinner. If you get hurt, I always take to a doctor. If you get hurt, your present, what do? You give him a Band-Aid, you give me a call. So since he's in my presence, he's my child, he's your presence, he's your child, this is a partnership. And we want the best for our child. So what we gonna do is work together to make sure this child had the best quality of education in both of our presence. So we gotta do this together.
Yeah.
And we need to include the child too, because sometimes the child gotta sit in and know what's going on, let them have to say. Cause they might be having a bad day and might not tell me, or go to school tell you, or vice versa, let me know what you might not know about it. It's because I know what you don't know, guess what? Now something happened in class. So now sometimes we gotta involve the child, what happened? What can we do better? Let them answer. So this is a partnership, this is our child. I'm sorry, y'all.
No apologies for action.
Unconditional love and regard
Yeah.
across settings, and so we hope that they're getting that at home, and we hope that they're getting that at school and at daycare. And right, still meeting the child where they're at. There are individuals outside of the label, the diagnoses, the behavior. You know, sometimes we adults, all of us, I'm a parent of 2 small children, and we go along with the flow. Oh, they're doing something bad, they're engaging in something bad. They still need love, unconditional love and kindness. And they still need us to be parents, they still need us to be teachers, educators, and they still need for us, to provide for them and care for them. But that's what comes to mind hearing you, just unconditional love and regard and acceptance. The other thing is accountability and ownership for when things go left. For professionals, and parents as well, like, how can I make things a little bit better? There's so many barriers, roadblocks, obstacles. How can we work together and reduce some of them?
Thank you. This next question is for parents, Benita. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. It's for Benita and Zakia. Looking ahead, what's one key message you would like to send to policymakers about what families and providers need most to help young children?
Well, first one, okay. My message would be to policymakers is position, fund position, and not punishment. You see what I'm saying? Because in the-
Breaking down something.
Right, yeah, they were, the teachers need funding. Don't take my child when you know you cannot train my child, or you don't have the equipment, or you don't have the training to deal with my child's diagnoses. And that was one issue with me, they took my child knowing they couldn't handle my child. And that started a whole one world full of stuff. So the teachers need to be trained, they need funding to bring in the right people. Cause we want everything to be exclusive, we don't want to turn not one child away. So the funding need to be there for the teachers, for them to bring people in, for them to stop building these prisons and these RTFs, like, starting young, put the money where it needs to go, provision. Training the parents need help as well, because when you're dealing with the child, you're dealing with the parent, and vice versa, you're dealing with the parent, you're dealing with the child, so you're dealing with the whole family. You know, if my life is off, when I bring my son to your facility, and then you ask me why I see food all day, or why I'm tired, or whatever, my life is off in my house, so that's what you're dealing with me, how can you help me deal with it? Trauma informed training for everybody, I just think when these policymakers are making these decisions, they need to just think about if it was their family, if it was their child, their brother or sister, and they would probably make different choices.
Thank you, Benita.
I would definitely say streamlining. I also work as a court-appointed special advocate volunteer in the social service system, so I see on the opposite end of the spectrum, kids are 15, 16, 17, there's been a lack of coordination of resources. Same thing happening at 15 months, 16 months, 17 months, is happening at 15 years. Streamlining, just like Octel is under 2 different state departments, like mandate, write it into a law, streamline services. There's sometimes 10, 11, 12, 20 adults responsible for managing one case. Number one, it's a waste of money, but it's also inefficient. So streamlining is I think I saw like in the recommendations, an agency to ensure oversight on collaboration, that has got to be there. Also, families don't necessarily know the difference between early intervention, behavioral health, mental health, emotional health, the pediatrician. There's all these different umbrellas for why this child is having these problems. Our teachers definitely don't know that. So helping our teachers, making sure as part of the CDA pathway, as part of whatever their pre-service training is, mandate that they understand those systems and streamline those systems. And if it means we have to reallocate some of the money that is being used to pay 20 different caseworkers, social workers, blah, blah, blahs, similar to how you go to a hospital and on the 6th floor is the ICU. On the 5th floor is the cardiac care unit. On the 4th floor is the maternity ward. Similarly, that is how childcare centers could operate. We have a classroom where there's intensive speech support. You only need one person to be in there. You don't need 10 different speech therapists. If we had a classroom where there's autistic support, you only need, right, like we could streamline by just standardizing those kinds of practices. The same way you don't have 10 different hospitals just because you have a baby here, you need heart surgery there. It's all in one hospital. We have kids counting on us. We have got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, well, I want to thank each of you. Thank you to all of our panelists for your honesty, for your insights, and your passion. Your voices remind us that this is not just about the numbers, it's not just about the data. It's about real children, real families, and the educators who work with them every day. We're very grateful for your time and perspective. Can we give this panel a
Oh,
right here, YouTube.
Just make sure you get my good
Oh.
side. It's the good side.
So we excited again.
Okay.
Just gonna reshare this.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just gonna reshare the slides. Gonna do it in one moment. Just having this.
How amazing was that panel? Can we give up another round of applause for us, people?
Is this where?
Yep.
Perfect.
And so we're now at our call to action. So at the core of what we are at Children First is a advocacy organization. So it wouldn't be right if we didn't end our presentation without a call to action. So we think it's really important with all these different players in the room, from providers to funders to policymakers, administrators, and also families, that we talk about things that you all can do because you all play a role in dismantling this very phenomenon that we're talking about. So for administrators, what is clear is that we have to implement consistent and equitable discipline policies. For teachers and providers, we need to make sure that people are having access to quality professional development that really meets the needs of the moment with coaching and consultation. Parents and families participate in advocacy and partnership for system improvement. Funders prioritizing work for equity and also workforce sustainability, and policymakers to adopt frameworks that prevent exclusion. We heard a lot of things today, and I hope you're really thinking about the different ways that you can take what you heard and making practical changes today in the environments that you support. And also to make sure that you're challenging folks you're in rooms with to think differently about how we support all children. When we're thinking about the title of this work, we were like, we cannot call it suspension and expulsion in early learning settings, right? Because we're trying to move away from that. So it was very intentional for us to name this project Supporting All Young Learners to Thrive. And we think that all of you have a role in that. And we hope that you can continue to making sure that this no longer is a phenomenon in PA.